I wanted to do a video on using BloC in Flutter. So there's a few different state management solutions in Flutter, but BloC is probably the most popular one as of now. And I wanted to kind of demystify the library for you. It can seem a little bit complicated for people that are new to Flutter, but I wanted to break it down to the simplest parts and show you why you should be using it if you're not. We're going to go over the fundamental concepts of BlocC, and I'm going to walk you through how they all fit together. As you can see here, we have a little app that I created. It doesn't really do much now. There's a input here for a food, and there's a food list below that. So the food list is currently empty, and we have two floating action buttons here. So if we go to the code, we have our My App, and I'm adding the food form to the home. So if we go to the food form is a stateful widget, and it has a container column of text field, and we have our food list right here. Okay, and we have our floating action buttons. To put two floating action buttons in a column, you just use the column and you add the floating action button. And don't forget the hero tags for your buttons, or you'll get a warning in your console. So the first button doesn't do anything. We have an empty method here. And our second button goes to a new screen called the food list screen. So the food list screen wraps our food list here. So it'll always have the same thing as we have here in our food list. So let's go here. You can see the same thing. It says food list. Okay, so the goal of this app is to show a list of foods here and also show the list of foods here too. But the list of foods will not be passed from this first screen to the next screen. We will store it in our BlocC. So let's go to our pubspec, and I've already added the Flutter BlocC package. This is what you will want to use for your Flutter app. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call the folder events. And let's create a new file here. I'm going to call this food event, or underscore. So food event.dart. So an event in BlocC is just a class that defines different actions for your app. And the actions are just different functions. So let's have a class here. So class food event, and we'll put a few different fields in here. We're going to have a field called food. So food. And let's import our food from the model. So if you go to the food model here that I created, it's very basic. It's just a constructor that sets the name of our food. So I'm keeping this very simple for this video. Okay, so let's go back to our food event, and I'm going to create another field that represents the index of the food in the list. So I'm going to call it int food index. Okay, and above our class here, I'm going to create a new enum. So I'm going to use a enum so we can better represent what type of action we want our event to hold. So I'm going to say enum event type, and the enums are going to be add, and delete. Okay, so for this app, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. I'm going to have two events, one to add a new food to a list, and one to delete a food from a list. So in our food event class, I'm also going to define a field for our event type. So I'm going to say event type, and just call it event type. Okay, so in our class here, I'm going to have our actions be add and delete. I'm going to create two constructors. So since we're not using the normal constructor like this, we need to create two named constructors. So we're going to have food event dot add will be the first one, and that's going to take in a food. And then we're going to have another one called food event dot delete, and this one is going to take in just an index. So we're going to have int index. Okay, so if you don't know about named constructors, please look that up online. It's very simple. You could also have like this. So this would be your basic constructor, and if you want multiple constructors in your class, then you need to actually do food event dot something. So in this one, I'm going to set the event type. So I'm going to say this dot event type equals event type dot add. So this is just being set so we have an easier time reading our code to know what event is actually happening. After this, we do this dot food equals food. Okay? And then for this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy and put delete. And then I'm going to set the index now. So I'm going to say this dot food index equals index. Okay, and this is our entire event class. So this class represents the actions that we want our block to listen for. Okay, so now let's create a new folder. I'm going to name it block. So now let's create a new file, and this will be our block file. So I'm going to call it food block.dart. So now we will actually create the block itself. So it'll be a class. So class food block, and every block needs to extend the block class. So extends block. So for a block, you need to define two different things. You need to define what the event is that it's looking for. So it's looking for the food event. And you also need to define the actual state itself. So for our state, we're going to create a list of foods. So we're going to have a list of foods. Okay? And now let's import our event. Let's import block. Oh, this should be food. Okay, and let's import our food. And now we need to actually override a couple different functions. So let's create two missing overrides. And they'll be the initial state and the map event to state. So for the initial state, this is where we set the initial state of our block. So the initial state of our block will just be a list of foods. And this will be an empty list. Okay, so that one is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So map event to state maps the event to the state in this block. So it maps the food event that it looks for to this list of foods here. So you'll notice that for our map event to state, it returns a stream. So a stream is basically just like a pipe that takes in different events, and we do things with the events on the other side. That's a very simple explanation. If you want to look up streams, I advise you to do so because it's a very important topic. But for our map event to state function here, we want this to be asynchronous. So for an asynchronous stream, you need to add the async keyword like we do normally, but now you need to add the asterisk by it. So this is how you create an asynchronous function for a function that returns a stream. So now we don't want to return anything, we want to yield. So we do yield here instead. But we're not going to have this code here, so let's get rid of this. And in our map event to state function, we want to do a switch. So it's likely in your app that you'll have different actions in your event. So we want to listen for the different actions separately. So we do a switch event, and then we have event type. And then we can have our cases. So we have case event type, and then we have .add. And then inside of this case, we want to do a yield. So a yield is how you do something with the data in this case. So a yield and stream are related. So if you do a asynchronous stream, you need to do a yield here. And for now, let's just do null. Okay, and let's do the same with delete. And then we can create a default here. And then we can just throw exception, and then we can say something like event not found. And then we can actually print out the event type. So we can do $, and then event, and close that. Okay. Oh yeah, and after this you need to do break also. So let's do our break here, break. So I hope that makes sense. If you are a little bit confused, look up asynchronous streams in Dart and it'll make more sense. Okay, so now let's actually add the logic for adding and deleting foods from our list. So when we add a new food, I want to copy the state from the current state because you don't want to modify the state directly. If you try to do that, you'll notice that it won't work correctly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new list of foods, and we're going to say new state equals list, and then to copy that from the current state, we say dot from, and then we actually have a state object. So this state object comes from the BlocC class itself. So let's go to definition here. You'll see that state inside of the BlocC returns the current state of the BlocC. So that's why this is here. If you're confused why you don't see state in this class, that's because it's not in this class, it's in the BlocC class. And the state initially gets set here. Okay, so now we can say if event.food is not equal to null, then we can say new state dot add event dot food, and that's it. So if we have a food in this event, we know that we are adding the event, or we know that we are adding the food because we are setting the food here. So in this case, we don't have a food object being set. So there's different ways to like set up your events and your BlocC, but this way seems the most easiest to understand for beginners. Okay, now for the delete, we're gonna copy this first line, and then we're just gonna have new state dot remove at. That's how you remove a item at a certain index, and then we're gonna say event dot food index because we're setting that here. Okay, and that's it. I'm keeping this very simple. We're just adding a new event to the list, and we're removing a event from the list. Okay, and if you want to, you can have a check here for the index, but I'm just going to leave it here for now. It's not really important, but you would normally want to check to see if it's some other number or like a negative number or something like that. So, okay, so now we're going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this food block delegate.dart. Okay, so this is going to be a delegate class. So a delegate in BlocC is just like a middleman to kind of intercept different events in your app. So you can intercept the event itself, you can intercept the state, like the change in state from the old state to the new state, and you can intercept any errors that you get in the BlocC itself. Okay, so we do this by first creating a class. So let's do class food block delegate, and this extends a class called BlocDelegate. Okay, and for this we can actually override 3 different functions that are very useful. First, let's do on event, and then let's do on, I think it's transition, and then the last one is on error. Okay, so these 3 overrides can come in handy in your app if you're trying to debug, or if you're trying to do like some analytics or something like that, or if you just want to log the events. This is a good place too. So on event takes in the BlocC and it takes in the event itself. So for these, you can just like print the event, and for this one we're going to print the transition, and for this one we're going to print the error. Okay, so these are probably very obvious. This takes the event, this takes the transition. So transition is the state transition. This object gives you the old state and the new state. So if you want to, you can say print transition dot current state and print transition dot what's the name, dot next state. Okay, so if you want to do something with your state as it transitions, you can do it here. If you want to do something in your BlocC with the state, you can do it here. Be careful not to put too much logic in these, or it might be confusing to somebody else that looks at your code. But this is a great place to log your state, events, and your errors. Okay, so that's all we're going to do for the food delegate now. Now we have the three most important parts of this library setup. We have our events defined, we have our block defined with our logic based on the event, and we have a delegate to intercept the event, the state, and the error. So let's go to our main, and now we will actually wire the block into our app. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the main, and now we're going to wire in our BlocDelegate to our app. So the way you do that is by first creating a BlocSupervisor, and the BlocSupervisor basically defines the delegate for your app. So you can say BlocSupervisor.delegate, and you can set it equal to the food block delegate, and that's it. Once you have this line of code here for your app, all of this in your food block delegate will get executed without you really having to do anything else. So without this line here, those print statements will never be seen in your console. Okay, so now let's go to our build function, and now we're going to wire in our food block. So it's actually pretty simple. We just wrap our material app in our BlocProvider. So a BlocProvider is a component that provides the block to your app. So let's go down here and let's do BlocProvider. And then here you define what block you want inside of your app. So we have food block. So we have a BlocProvider of type food block. Okay, and then we do parentheses. Create is how you create the block itself. So we say context, it takes in a context, and then it's a function that returns the food block. So food block. And now we need a child here. So the child is actually the widget that you want to return, which is our material app. So let's cut this, and we'll put that in here. Get rid of that. So you can see that was actually pretty simple. All we did was wrap our material app with our BlocProvider, and we defined our food block with the create field here. Okay, so let's go to our food form and let's actually use our block. So let's go to food form, and we're gonna go to the save button here. So when we type a food in here, so let's type in burger, I want to save the food to our block. So that's actually pretty easy. We just define a BlocProvider, and then we say .of, and you define the type here. So the type is of type food block. And this takes in a context. If you want to see this more too, you can look at the documentation here. Let's look at .of. So you can see that being used here. .of, and then you have your context. So we have our food block with the context. Okay, so let's import our food block. And now we need to do .add. So this .add is not the same add as our event itself. This add is adding the event to the food block. So now we define our event. So I'm going to say food event, and then we do food event .add. So this is our .add constructor. Let's import the event, food event .add, and then we create a new food. So I'm going to create a new food constructor and just pass in the food state. So it'll be, we have it up here. We're setting the food name as we type, and our state is right here. So underscore food name. Then we just pass in food name. Okay, so I know this is a lot to put on one line, but I hope it all makes sense. We're adding a food event to our BlocProvider, and we're setting the event type to add, and we're adding the current food name state to that block. So we're adding this event with the food name to the current stream in our block. If you want to, you can change this constructor name to like maybe insert food or something. So it says food event dot insert food or something like that. That might be easier to read than having two adds here, but not really important for now. Okay, so that's all we need to do in our food form here. So let's go to our food list. So we have our food list here, and we're just saying food list. So let's actually get rid of all this here. So we have our child, and for our child, I'm going to create a BlocConsumer. So a BlocConsumer is a widget to consume the block state itself. So if you're listening for a change in your state in your block, you'll use a BlocConsumer normally. There's a couple other options too, but BlocConsumer we'll use for this app. Okay, so BlocConsumer, and this takes in the block type. So we have food block, and it'll be the state too. So the state is list food. Okay, so you'll have a builder here for your BlocConsumer. So the builder is what gets built when your state changes in your block. So the builder takes in the context and it takes in the actual state. So our state will be the food list. Okay? And then we will return something. So for our app, we're going to create a list view. So we're going to return a list view, and we're going to have a builder for the list view. So listView.builder. I'm assuming that you already know how to create a list in Flutter, so I'm going to go past this pretty fast. So for this one, I'm going to have the scroll direction be vertical, so axis dot vertical, and I'm going to set shrink wrap to true. If you don't know what all this is, you can just look it up in the list view documentation for Flutter. And I'm going to set the padding and this to let's do edge insets. Let's do 16, and I'm going to set the item count. I'm going to set that to the list or to the length of the food list. So food list dot length. Okay, and then we're going to build the items in our list view with widgets. So let's do item builder. And that takes in a build context and a index. And then we're going to return the widgets that we want to build for our items. So I'm going to have this be a card. So I'm going to return a card. And the card is going to have a child of type. It'll be list tile. Okay, and for the title is going to be a text. And the text is going to be the name of the food. So it'll be food list, the one that we pass in here. We also have the index from our item builder. So index dot name. So now I want to create a onTap function here. I'm going to make this pretty simple. When we tap the card, it's going to delete the food. So I'm going to say BlocProvider. So whenever you want to access a function in your block, you need to use a BlocProvider. So BlocProvider dot of food block, and then it'll be context. So get used to this pattern here, and then we're going to add the event to this, and then we're going to say food event dot. Let's import this food event dot delete, and then we're just going to pass in the index because we have our index being passed into our event here. Okay, and as you can see here, we have a warning. Let's see what this says. It says add required argument listener. So let's do that. So we need to listen for our block. So we do that with the context and the state. So for the state here, it's just the food list. So it'll be food list. And for this, I'm actually just going to create a SnackBar item. So I'm going to say scaffold dot of, and then we're going to pass in the context, and then we're going to say show SnackBar. So this is how you show a SnackBar in your app. And we're going to say SnackBar contents, so content, and the content will just be a text. So it'll be text, and let's just say added. So added. Let's do this. Okay, so now when we add a new item to the food list, this will get called. But you'll notice that this will also get called if we delete the item too, because it's getting called on all events. So let's actually go back up here, and we're going to have a couple of different options here. Actually, let's import our food item first. Okay, and in our BlocConsumer, there's two other options that we can use if we want to. One is called build when, and it takes in a previous state and it takes in the current state. And we'll just define these as previous and current. Okay? And then we have a listen when. And this defines the same state changes. So we have previous state and we have current state. Okay, if you want, you can actually define these as the list of foods itself. You could say list of food if you want to, just to make it easier to read. So let's just do that right now. Foods. Okay, so these two options are very convenient when you want to only rebuild things when your state changes in a certain way, or you want to listen for changes at certain times in your block. So for build when, we're not actually going to do anything, we're just going to return true. So this will always rebuild the widget on a state change. For example, if you want to only rebuild when, let's say, if previous dot length is less than current dot length, then we return true, else we return false. So this says to rebuild your list here only when the current length of the list is greater than the previous length. So basically when we add a new food, this will get rebuilt. But if for any reason our BlocConsumer gets called here when our list is the same, then we'll never rebuild the current list. And keep in mind, if you're trying to update an item in your list, you won't want to have this exact statement here, because your list will be the same length. It'll just be a food item in the list that gets changed or updated. Okay, so for listen when, I want to set something here too. I want to say if current dot length is greater than previous dot length, then I want to return true, else we can do false. So it's pretty much the same condition here. Actually, I'm gonna copy and paste this to here so it's the same exact condition. Okay, so if our new state, the list state, is greater than the previous state, then we rebuild the list. If not, we don't. And if the current list length is greater than the previous list length, first let's do this. So if the current length is greater than the previous length, then we show the SnackBar added, because we can guarantee that we have a new item in our list. If that's not true, then we don't listen and we don't show the SnackBar. So that's why these two options are very convenient. They're not necessary, but they help you kind of fine-tune when your app gets rebuilt, like when different things inside of your app gets rebuilt. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please leave a comment in the comment section. Okay, so that's looking good. So there's one thing that I need to do before I run this. We need to go back to our food block, and right now we're yielding null, so we don't want to do that. We want to use this new state here. So let's yield new state. Remember, this yield will return our new state, but it won't quit this function. We continue to listen to new events in our map event to state here. Okay, so let's save, let's reload, and let's test. Okay, so let's first enter burger. Let's save. And you can see we have our burger here, and we have our logs here. We're logging the food event. So we have burger. Let's go to our next screen. You can see we have burger here. We're not passing the food list to this screen. This is coming from our block. Let's go to our food list again. So our BlocConsumer is listening here for the event, and you can see we have our build when and our listen when. We have our builder here, so it's coming from our food list instead of our builder. So that's good to know. This is all working correctly. Let's go back and add pizza, save, and you can see our snack bars here too. Okay, so let's try to delete a item from our food list. Let's clear this, and I'm going to click on pizza. You can see nothing happened. Let's go here. Let's click burger. And there's one more thing that we need to do, since I noticed that we are now deleting foods from our list. We can no longer use the condition that I created here, because when we delete a food, this condition is no longer true and we're not rebuilding the list. So our foods are not being deleted from our list in the UI, and we might get some errors with that. So let's get rid of this condition here, and let's just set it to true. So this will always get rebuilt. So let's set it to true here. But this condition is still good because we only want to show the snack bar when we add a food, not when we delete a food. So this listener will only get executed when we add a new food. Okay, so let's reload. Let's add different things to test out. Let's say burger. Let's say pizza. Pie. Let's say cheese. Okay, and now let's go to the second screen. You can see that our items are here too. So let's try and delete a item from here. Let's say pie. Let's press pie, and we delete pie. Pizza, we delete pizza. Burger, we delete burger. And let's go back to the previous screen. You can see it's all the same here too. Let's add a new one. Let's say, I don't know, cake. Save. And we can go back and we can see cake is here. So if you don't believe me that this is coming from our provider and not from our previous screen, let's go back to the food form and let's remove this from that screen. And let's get rid of our import here. Let's reload. And let's go to the second screen. You can see that it's empty. Let's add pie, burger. So now nothing is happening on this screen. The only thing that we're doing on the screen is we're adding the food names to our block. Okay, let's save. And let's go to the second screen. And you can see our items are here now. And we can delete everything back here. You can see that everything is still the same. I hope this all makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know. BlocC is a very powerful tool. I went over the very basics of BlocC. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with it. If you go to the docs here, you can see that there's multi-block provider, so you can provide multiple blocks to your app. So that's pretty cool. You'll probably do that in a much larger app, but for like a small app like this, you might only have one provider. You might have a lot of different events in your provider or inside of your block. But it's up to you how you define the architecture for your app. You can have many different blocks with different events, or you can have many different actions inside of one event that represent your entire app. It's really up to you how you want to design your app. So yeah, I hope this all makes sense. I might do a part 2 on this in the future where I go more in depth, but I wanted to create a video for beginners to get started with BlocC. It's very straightforward once you do it 1 or 2 times. So yeah, stay tuned for more videos and happy coding. Bye.